Okay, everybody. Welcome to the first of our series of Open Government Action Plan webinar series. So over the next few days, we'll be actually introducing a couple of the efforts of civil society in Malaysia working on open government initiatives. And today, our topic is freedom of information. And we're glad to have our guest here, Washla from the Center for Independent Journalism, um, who will be speaking a bit on, the efforts that they've been working on in terms of trying to get a freedom of information enactment bill in Malaysia to be tabled. Um, so without further ado, I'm gonna go discuss a little bit introduction on open government partnership and why we're doing these series of introductory webinars on different topics related to open government. So let me just share my screen. Okay. Um, so what's freedom of information and how does it relate to the Open Government Partnership? So for those of you who are not familiar with the Open Government Partnership, it's a global collaboration that brings together government reformers, civil society organizations, and citizens to work together to establish accountable, transparent government and the government at the citizen service. It actually comprises, it's a global partnership. And in this open government partnership, we have dozens of countries around the world, all participating, working on similar efforts, not just within collaborations within their country, but also internationally as well, in supporting each other to make an open and participatory government possible. For us in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, our neighbors are Indonesia and Philippines are actually founding members of the Open Government Partnership and have been members since 2011 when the Open Government Partnership was launched. Um, so, um, since this is seems like such a great effort, and it seems to be a global effort, it's like how does Malaysia become a member of this global partnership, and how can we, as a country, join these global efforts? Well, to join the OGP, we must commit to uphold the principles of open and transparent government by first endorsing the Open Government Declaration. And the declaration basically is to foster a global culture of open government that empowers and delivers for citizens the ideals of an open and participatory 21st century government. And if we look at what is happening locally, this is very much aligned with what what the government has been doing, and it's actually part of the 11th Malaysia Plan, which is ending this year. If you notice that little slide on the right, for the past 5 years, the Malaysian government has actually has a strategic plan towards achieving these things. You'll see that there's a demand for more sophisticated citizen needs. Um, there's a demand for citizen engagement. There's high expectations from youth, especially the rapid increase now in technology, culture, and demography. And we've seen it with COVID-19. And it's further like, how to describe it? COVID-19 has put it into a bigger spotlight in terms of the need for these digital services, especially with things like the restricted restricted movement orders. And you'll see that at the matter and you look at the motto of what the Malaysian Public Service has been trying to do for the past 5 years. It says an inclusive digital government, spearheading citizen-centric service delivery, which is pretty much in line with what open government is doing. So since we're doing this already in Malaysia, what's stopping us to be part of the Open Government Partnership? So the Open Government Partnership requires 4 key criterias. One of them is fiscal transparency, which is the timely publication of essential budget documents. So part of an open government requires us as citizens, as well as our elected representatives, to be able to know, to participate in how a budget is created, and then also to be able to monitor exactly, where is our tax and tax money going to, and is what it's funding. What is it? Are the priorities meeting our needs as a citizen, as a country? We'll actually be talking more on that tomorrow with our guest ideas on Malaysian state for fiscal transparency. The other one, which is the topic for today, which CIJ will share. So the second eligibility criteria is actually access to information. And access to information has, we've heard it called in the different terms. Access to information is one of them. FOI, or freedom information, is another term. And we've often also seen locally a campaign, which is like my right to know. So the right to information is are all similar takes on this need for an access to information. And the eligibility criteria says that we need, in order to be part of the global partnership, is to have access to an information law that guarantees the public's right to information and access to government data. So without this right to information law for open government, we would not meet the criteria of what we would call an open government. The third third of the 4 eligibility criteria is public officials' asset disclosure. Again, in Malaysia, we have steps towards this. It requires actually a law or rule or regulations that require public disclosure of income and assets for elected, not only just for elected public officials, but also senior public officials. So because this is essential to anti-corruption and an open and accountable government. And it's important to make this data available. So while we have taken some steps in Malaysia, we do not yet have a comprehensive asset declaration law or regulations. Only income and only limited. The fourth pillar or criteria of open government partnership is actually citizen engagement. And this is basically an open government requires the government to engage and include the citizens in their participation in policymaking and governance. And of course, the enabler for this is that you need some level of civil liberties to be able to participate. So not only the participation is not only just collaborating to achieve certain goals, but it's also allowing, for example, freedom of speech to possibly criticize or have different opinions of the policies that government is doing. So how are we doing on all these 4 in Malaysia? We're so close to being part of the Open Government Partnership. Basically, we're based in the last review, we were only just 2 points away from meeting the minimum core eligibility threshold. So we score about 10 out of 16 to be part of the thing. So we only needed 2 more points at the last review. How do we get over these 2 points and be able to define ourselves as a country that's an open government and be part of the Open Government Partnership? Basically 2 areas that should be a focus on in Malaysia is 2. One is the access to information law, or the access to information criteria. And second, to improve the asset disclosure. Right now, it's not in public. The data for the asset disclosures is not in the public, and it's off limit. use. So having said that, we're now gonna so having said that, it's like seeing that asset declaration is a key point um, and a stumbling block towards for Malaysia to be part of the Open Government Partnership and to define ourselves as an open government according to international criteria. Um, uh, we're going to be we're invited to this session, the Center for Independent Journalism, and which has been working for quite some time. I think for several years now, on trying to push a freedom of information law in Malaysia. With this, I'd like to introduce our guest. She's Washla, and she's the executive director of the Center for Independent Journalism. And she will be sharing with us updates on, what's the status of access to information in Malaysia, and the recent efforts for the Center for Independent Journalism. So, Washla, if you're ready, we're switching over to you. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Kyril, and greetings to everyone. Happy to be here to talk a little bit about our past initiatives, current initiatives, and where we are at the moment with regards to a right to information legislation. If we are to look at exactly what Kyril mentioned earlier, the right to information is really fundamental because it's crucial in facilitating public informing opinions about issues that really affect us, and this is necessary for us to hold the government and its related bodies and officials accountable for their decisions and actions. And without the information, we are not able to participate constructively in any of these decision-making processes, and hence it has an implication in terms of transparency and participatory democracy, good governance, and also a rule of law. If we are, most of our work is really located in terms of international and regional principles around a right to information, particularly Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's also important for us to note that even the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration has a provision on everyone's right to freedom of opinion expression, including freedom to hold opinions and impart information. But then if we are to look at the context in Malaysia, while we have Article 10 of the Federal Constitution providing constitutional guarantee of freedom of expression, it does not explicitly include freedom of information as a fundamental human right. Yeah. At the same time, of course, we have other legislative barriers, including the Official Secrets Act. We have Section 203A of the Penal Code, as well as Section 114A of the Evidence Act. These are challenges that we constantly face in terms of trying to access information from public authorities. But we also have some benchmarks. It's not that we are starting from scratch. We have the Selangor FOI enactment as well as the Penang FOI enactments, which has some fundamental elements already in place. Of course, these are not foolproof because the Official Secrets Act or the secrecy laws in a way supersedes these state level enactments, and they are not necessarily fully implementable, not just at the state level. Of course, there are wider federal level implications because it's only these two states with any kind of legislation or even mechanisms, and the other states does not have these mechanisms in place. All our work around right to information and the move towards a legislation on right to information is it's really enshrined within fundamental principles that all information held by public authorities are public information. So on that basis, we look at fundamental principles that there's a need for proactive disclosure by the state because there is a duty to publish. And this also includes maximum disclosure. And any kind of exemption will have to be narrow and only on the basis of legitimate reasons, say such as national security, trade, and things like that, which are really defined, which should be defined narrowly. We also, when we talk about a legislation or right to information, it must always meet the public interest and the harm test. So if an information is going to be denied or not disclosed, it has to meet the harm test first. Yeah, there has to also be ease of access so that everybody is able to access it and not be limited in terms of barriers placed. There has to be also strong powers and mandates being given to the commissions who will be enforcing this legislation at different levels. So what have we done so far? Grappling with all these challenges, legislative challenges, grappling with changes in law, grappling with COVID, and its implication on a lot of our work. If we look back over the last, I would say 15 years, CIJ, together with a number of other organizations, was instrumental in initiating a right to information campaign in 2005, 2006. Now, the key aim of this campaign was to promote the enactment of legislation. Yeah. And it also included a component which reviewed existing laws which act as barriers to the full promotion of RTI, especially the OSA. Now, this initial campaign in early 2000 was also instrumental in providing support and the drive behind the Penang and Selangor FOI legislations. The CSOs at the current moment, we are kind of in a very interesting situation, I would say, because 2 years ago with the Pakatan Harapan government and the Pakatan Harapan manifesto, we saw a commitment towards reviewing the OSA and repealing the OSA and balancing that with an enactment of a right to information legislation. There was a lot of commitments. We would have followed, if we followed the news, we would have noted in 2018, the Prime Minister first said, yes, we would repeal OSA. Of course, then there was a commitment to review, study the OSA. In November last year, the then Law Minister, Dr. V.K. Liu, had reiterated the commitment to repeal the OSA and come up with a new legislation. Now, these were very explicit commitments by the past government. Yeah. In that context, the CSOs have already worked towards developing a model right to information bill. There is already a model law that's available that will soon be coming up for public consultation. We had also strengthened a lot of collaboration with stakeholders such as the Legal Affairs Division under the Prime Minister's Office, BAYU. We had also strengthened collaboration with academic institutions, with Sohakam. And this strengthened collaboration with the government was very crucial in moving the agenda forward. In 2019, November, we had a stakeholders consultation, which was a collaboration between CIJ, BAYU, and the CSO Freedom of Expression cluster members, which actually for one of the first times, I would say, when it comes to RTI legislation, bringing together different stakeholders, which included not just the civil society, academics, media, but most importantly, government representatives from the various government agencies. We had representatives from police, we had representatives from the Ministry of Communications and Multimedia, representatives from, even representatives from Ministry of Women, because they are the holders of information, right? They are the ones who would be then tasked to disclose this information. Now, that was a crucial step forward for us, because we had discussions from ground up in how would it look like, or what would be the process that would be involved in coming up with the legislation. And because it was so grounded in a consultative and a stakeholder discussion, we were also already starting to discuss what would be the challenges and what would be the barriers and what would be the necessary or needed mechanisms that has to be put in place to ensure that this legislation gets passed, one, and then implemented effectively through the relevant mechanisms. Yeah, so that was a really positive development for us as CSOs. That was followed by an expert group meeting this year in July. And I'm very how do I say, pleased to know that this was in July 2020, after the change in government, where we were still able to have that collaboration with Bayu. Yeah, this continued. This expert group meeting brought some of the previous stakeholders who were at the stakeholders consultation, but it also brought together experts from other countries, which included experts from Scotland, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Canada, Australia, to talk about their own experiences with the law, and as well as the implementation status, including the successes and challenges. So we were able to bring a few commissioners who had real engagement and real experiences in actually implementing these laws. It actually brought up, in the discussions, we realized that there are definitely outstanding issues that we will have to address, particularly in terms of what we consider the scope of exemptions. We also looked at how do we, because if we look at the Malaysian context, all our arguments have always been the need for OSA, or the justification of retaining the OSA for reasons of national security. Yeah, there's always also the need to align federal, state, and other legislation and processes. And we also need to iron out a lot of things when it comes to the powers and enforceability of decisions by any oversight bodies like the Commission. This expert group meeting then resulted in continued discussion with Bayu, where we realized that there needs to be more support given to the government in through research, test cases, and compilation of case studies. Yeah, we also discussed specific, how do I say, consultations at the national level in different locations. The expert group meeting, the collaboration between CIJ, Bayu, and the CSO FOE cluster continued with a meeting that we collectively had with Suhakam last month, where again we discussed continued support and collaboration. This were all the very, very positive developments, yeah, and very encouraging, because we can see the commitment of especially Bayu in wanting to see this forward. We then moved on to our collaborations around the road shows. The first road show is going to be held in September, on the 10th of September in Penang, which is this Thursday. And we have road shows planned in Sabah, Sarawak, Johor, Kelantan, and Putrajaya. Yeah. Now, this is where we now see some challenges, because the roadshow was initially supposed to be, again, a collaboration between Bayu and CIJ and other CSOs. But aside from the Penang one, there is a high possibility that the other roadshows would not continue along the same track, because Bayu might not be able to continue that level of collaboration because at this point in time, Bayou is taking a step back to have their own interministerial discussions first before they recommit to the engagement with the CSOs. So this, but however, the positive thing is the ties are not completely cut. Yeah. So while it might not be a collaboration, Bayou would continue to engage in these roadshows by actually attending them and observing the discussions. Yeah. Now, as CSO initiatives, what we see now is, while there's been, in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of focus on pushing for the legislation to engagement with the state, with the government, with all the administration at the time. Now, there has to be a shift in our strategies. I think we need to get the voices from the public through public consultations. I mean, the roadshows are also our way of really getting the voices from the public really reflected. And that's why it's important that we don't just concentrate these discussions and, inputs and sharing within the Klang Valley, but to go out to all the other locations. We also have planned dialogues with parliamentarians. Now, we know how it's always been in the past of trying, there's a possibility, of course, of perhaps getting some dialogues with an opposition. But I think what is really going to be crucial for us in terms of gauging the success in moving forward this agenda of legislation is the possibility of engaging with MPs from the current administration. Yeah, that's going to be really crucial. Of course, the ongoing awareness campaign. And thank you, Karel, for continuing to use the hashtag My Right to Know campaign hashtag for us. And I think we will continue every time you see this hashtag, there will be ongoing campaign. Please also do look out for a campaign that we are planning on the 28th of September, which is the International Universal Access to Information Day, or the International Right to Know Day. There will be some events that we would be holding, including the launching of our online public consultation. We are also embarking on very specific research. One research is looking at 6 different countries on how effective they've been in implementing the right to know, RTI legislation, but we're also embarking on a research with JCI to look at the status of implementation in Penang and Selangor. It's building up from the past researches that have been carried out by different organizations, including C4, but we are also going to be testing the system as we are conducting the research and the analysis. One other thing we realized, that in as much as we are looking at Selangor and Penang, there is also it's also necessary for us to look at the other states. How is it going to be if we need to access information from these states? So we are looking at the different agencies' websites to see if we can submit requests through, there's different portals that they have where you submit, questions, requests for information and things like that. So we're going to test different mechanisms on very specific issues. And this is a discussion, Karel, we've had with you and different organizations as well, how we pull together a framework to test this. Yeah, so it's going to be a collaboration between a few organizations, including with SENA project. We will, of course, start compiling case studies from the media, because media is another crucial stakeholder in this process, and they've had a lot of experiences in trying to access information and at the same time experiencing barriers to getting the right information, hence impacting their news. And especially if you're embarking on investigative journalism, access to information is the fundamental element, right? So these are continued CSO initiatives. A lot of these initiatives are initiatives by CIJ, but CIJ works together with a number of other organizations within the freedom of expression cluster. So there's a lot of ongoing collaboration that would happen. Now we have, there's always this question in terms of what can you do, what can you as civil society do? What can you as the media do? And what can you as, parliamentarians do? What can you as public do? And I think it's crucial, especially for the public, is to engage in the various public consultation. There has to be a two-way process. So it's not just engaging in the public consultation and listening to the updates, but really sharing what's happening on the ground and why it's necessary, to have those experiences on the ground reflected through a legislation, or why it's necessary to have a legislation to address the challenges on the ground. I think that two-way conversation is extremely important, and it will really feed into and influence any kind of process that we take forward, right? So we encourage everyone, NGOs, civil society organizations, academics, media, to join these roadshows. Information will always be put up on this upcoming roadshows, but please do join. We would also encourage, especially public in Penang and Selangor, to test the enactments and the mechanisms which are available. Yeah, and as you're testing it, please do share the stories with us. So there are many ways I think we can discuss possible engagement, collaboration, but also trying to drive the push towards getting an enactment. And the enactment is not just the end result, right? The enactment is actually a step towards getting the larger right to know, right to information really protected and promoted in the context of Malaysia, aiming and heading towards a transparent and accountable government or a state. Yeah, I'll stop here, Karel.
Thank you for that update. You've answered the questions that I was planning to ask you, but but yeah, for the audience on YouTube and Facebook as well on Zoom, please leave your we'll be able to answer some of your questions over the next few minutes. So please leave them in either the YouTube comments, Facebook channel, Facebook live video, or on the Zoom chat itself. And our moderators will pick it up to answer. But while we're waiting for your questions, I have a few questions on for Washla and CIJ. So first one is that I've noticed that we've had different ways of mentioning the same thing, access to information, and then we have FOI, freedom of information, and in Malaysia the campaign is my right to know. So why? And then you also mentioned that for us in Malaysia, it's not actually the FOI bill, but the right to information bill. Can you explain a little bit on the differences and why we're using right to information in Malaysia?
Yeah, I think it's as we were moving forward in all our advocacy and work around information and access to information and freedom of information, we decided to locate it within the rights language, because rights are claimable and rights are, it's really backed up by international standard. And when we talk about right to information, it is not just about access. It's about having the opportunities there, talking about proactive disclosure, maximum disclosure, having the access is the second part, right? And but also seeing the results. Yeah. So when we use the term right, it takes us towards the right as enshrined in international law, the right to have our information or the right to access these information promoted and protected. So that's why we're moving away from the freedom of information terminology to right to information terminology. Rights are already enshrined, it's claimable, and it's accessible. Yeah, we are afraid by just saying freedom of information, we are not putting into place specific measures and requirements that would guarantee the realization of this particular right.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned a few things about your road shows coming up and how the public should participate. can you share with us, like, okay, let's say I'm a concerned citizen, or or youth interested in being part of this, and collaborating as you discussed, and putting our inputs in. Can you share with us, like, how what channels do we have in terms of contacting CIJ? Where can we learn more about your seminars, to contact you? And yeah.
Okay, so we are generally contactable through the traditional ways, means of email and website. Our website is cijmalaysia.net, not .org, yeah? It's .net. We are also contactable through a Gmail, cijmalaysia at gmail.com. But we can also be contacted via our social media platforms, which is Twitter. We are CIJ_Malaysia, or Facebook, CIJ.my. These are, and we are also on Instagram. So you'll be able to find all the event information here. I'm also just for these roadshows, we would be sending out invites to all the different platforms, as well as to all the different uh, chat groups and networks that we are part of. You have to register to Eventbrite. I'm actually going to post the link here on the chat box for everyone to be able to access it as well. Please do click on the link, and you'll be able to register for the Penang Roadshow. Yeah, I think just to look out for us on the different platform. We also have a designated person within CIJ who is really focusing on RTI. So you can also contact Loshna Shagar, who's our program officer. So there are different means of contacting us. But I think what's really important is also to just check out our platforms, social media platforms, for updated information.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Because
Mhm.
yeah, we've been working in this for a long time, and so sometimes it can be quite intimidating. It's like, how do I even get into part of these things?
Mhm.
So I duly recommend that for those of you who have not yet participated before, just sign up, follow the social media accounts
Mhm.
that Washla has just shared, and you can engage. You can directly on social media. You can send an email. You can ask about what's happening and so on. And not only just the Center for Independent Journalism will be more than willing to help you out, in terms
Mhm.
of seeing how you can participate. But Washla also mentioned the FOE, or the Freedom of Expression Cluster. So you can also engage with any of these other NGOs as well. So part of the Freedom of Expression Cluster includes the MCCHR, like the Malaysian Center for Constitutionalism and Human Rights. If you're interested in a more aspect of anti-corruption and transparency, this includes C4, which is the Center for Anti-Corruption and Cronyism. If you're interested, in terms of how in terms of working around similar areas, but in terms of hate speech, for example, there's also Article 19 Malaysia. If you more if you're interested in terms of issues around online gender violence and gender issues, we also have Chris Network is part of this FOE cluster. And finally, of course, if you're more on if you're more technically inclined, especially in terms of digital government and civic tech, there's us, CNAR project, that you can engage with. So you can engage with any of these NGOs along with CIJ to participate in any of these roadshows, and also to keep up to date with them. So it's strongly encouraged to find out more. We'll post these links on our Twitter and Facebook accounts that Washla just shared, including the upcoming roadshows that they have. So I'm just gonna check here, see if there's any questions from from everybody else. Okay, so there's a question to Washla. Okay, so here's a question for Washla from the group. You referred to international and regional principles, informing the work on right to information in Malaysia. What has been the extent of the contribution of Malaysians and those in terms of the global South in terms of designing these principles? Is it something that's, is there like a kind of monopoly on these things from the global North or developed countries in terms of these concepts of like the right to information and freedom of information? Yeah.
Okay. That's a really interesting question. If we were just to look at two different sets of international law that informs these principles, one is the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948, and the ICCPR, which is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was adopted in 1966. Now, Malaysia's been, and both the UDHR and the ICCPR were adopted by the United Nations. Now, Malaysia is a member of the United Nations, and technically they are bound, in a way, and by these standards as merely being a member. However, I would say the ICCPR now requires ratification, and Malaysia has yet to ratify the ICCPR. They've only ratified 3 international human rights instruments, which include CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of a Child, and the ICPD, which is the Convention on Persons with Disability. So yes, they were just merely, being a member of the United Nations, Malaysia, well, they were part of it. They were not explicitly instrumental in developing it, right? But what I would say is there should not be a kind of a global North, global South divide when it comes to us enshrining international human rights principle, because almost all other countries had been part of developing these international human rights instruments. Yeah, I would say for example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the first drafts were actually drafted by Philippines and Russia. Yeah, so there's always been this, I think sometimes we just get a little bit too carried away with the narrative and rhetorics that it's the global North who's determine the agenda or the principle. At the same time, when it comes to regional standards, yeah, especially the ASEAN standards, I would say even the civil society organizations in ASEAN were part of the lobbying process, or were also groups who were consulted by the team who was tasked to draft this. So the civil, including Malaysian civil society, yeah, there is the ASEAN People's Forum Network in Malaysia, which had contributed to the different processes, both regional and national processes, in influencing the principles that are enshrined in the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. They're not necessarily the ideal ones, but at least there are some very positive things that we can take from that. So I would say the principles, the standards, and some of it, I mean, we are looking at 1948 and 1966, right, article, but they also evolve. It's these conventions or international human rights instruments are living documents. They evolve the way the states interpret these standards. So I say now the onus is actually on our side as we take in these principles. How do we interpret it in the context of Malaysia to ensure that the principles and the spirit of the principles are enshrined in our, not just our legislation, but all our work. I hope that answers that question in a very roundabout way.
I'll actually add a little bit more to that. You'll notice
Mm-hmm.
earlier in my slide, I actually mentioned that a lot of these principles on open government is actually very much aligned with our own, public
Mm-hmm.
service delivery initiatives. So if you'll notice, pretty much every government website, every government ministry, every government agency, there is very clear hotline for information. There's a
Mm-hmm.
clear methods in terms of online contact forms for the public to ask for information. Uh, so this is not a how to describe it. It's not a foreign concept for people to ask for information, especially about government and government services, and it's actually part of good public service delivery. Um, I also like to add, yeah. So um, Washla did mention that there's a lot of different initiatives already in Malaysia. Another example was, for example, in the National Anti-Corruption Plan, again, developed in Malaysia. That's freedom of information is also one of the goals of that plan. And yeah, just to repeat what Washla said, um, uh, participation is key, and so we like the freedom of information law in Malaysia, how it should be, how it should look like, what kind of restrictions it should have. These should all be developed by us Malaysians, and this would only happen if we participated and raised our concerns, and all concerns are valid. And this is how we shape our own bill. It's through participation, through feedback in these processes, which CIJ and I think Bayu have made very open, an open process. So we strongly encourage people to, especially Malaysians, to keep engaging with this process in terms of participating and giving feedback for
Yeah.
these developments.
Yeah,
Um,
Karen, if I might just add to
mhm,
that, right? I think as we move forward in terms of our own engagement in this process, when we talk about right to information, it's not necessarily just limited to a legislation. I think it's the whole focus on how do we engage with, say, if we are engaging with different governments, right? There are different ways of how we can promote right to information. Engaging with, say, the Ministry of Communications and Multimedia, it's also talking about repeal of some of our very repressive provisions and laws, right? Talking to the home ministry has, or we need to also talk about different aspects of what they can do in terms of promoting right to information, as in how do we address the challenges and constraint due to the whole secrecy laws that we have. It's not just the Official Secrets Act, but the way we look at the sphere that state agencies have in disclosing information and the implication on that. So it's the entire discussion on any aspect of our work, as you said, that even the anti-corruption thing has to also focus on right to information. So there are different elements to this that we all can engage in different platforms. So every advocacy that we move towards, every activity campaigns that happens at the ground level, it in to a large extent it always requires information. And when there is a barrier to information, that is when you realize that these lack of transparency is likely contributing to the corruption, or basically exacerbating the corruption.
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we're glad to actually start off with freedom of information.
Mhm.
So our next sessions tomorrow and on Thursday, we'll actually cover these additional information that people need. So
Mhm.
tomorrow at the same time, we're going to have
Mhm.
Uni from Ideas Malaysia talk about the state of our access to the fiscal transparency,
Mhm.
the budgets, what priorities are the government spending money on. So yeah, we're going to be looking forward to that session tomorrow to see how it is, and especially in light of the upcoming budget in September. I think that session will be quite insightful in terms of exactly how much information we can actually access in terms of the budget process and their participation in that for Malaysia. And again, what Washla said, another aspect, on Thursday, we would actually cover open parliament or legislative data, again, at the same time at 2 p.m. And we're going to cover on exactly what kind of information we can actually get parliament, and what information we can get as citizens through our elected representatives and their work in parliament and the state legislatures. So that's going to be on 2 p.m. And we are repeating again, access to information, parliament, access to information to budgets. And if possible, we might, next week, if we're able to do it, we're also going to start looking at in terms of access to data, and also access to, for example, asset declarations of senior public officials. So with that, we don't have any more questions. I'd really like to say a warm, thank you to Washla for making the time, and Center for Independent Journalism to share their insights and work. And yep, follow on CNR Project. We are also on social media. You can search for CNR Project on Facebook, and on Twitter we're just CNR Project with no spaces. And we will be sharing the links that Washla has just shared, as well as their upcoming events. So with that, thank you for being with us, and thank you, Washla, for taking the time for us to join our online seminar.
Thank you all.